The envelope in Beatrice Jenkins's hand had become as soft as cloth from being touched so many times during the long journey west, though she had never once broken its seal to read the words inside. She already knew what it said because her aunt had dictated every word before pressing the wax stamp into place, and those words were lies, every single one of them. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the saloon in El Paso, Texas, and Beatrice steadied herself against the wooden frame, her fingers tightening around that damning piece of paper. It was September of 1876, and the heat rising from the dusty street created shimmering waves that made the buildings appear to dance. Beatrice gathered her skirts and accepted the driver's weathered hand as she stepped down onto the planked walkway. Her traveling dress, once a respectable shade of gray, had turned brown from the dust of 3 weeks on the trail. She had left St. Louis with $50 sewn into her petticoat and a heart full of desperation that her aunt mistook for gratitude. The letter was addressed to a man named Gerald Morrison, a shopkeeper who supposedly needed a wife. According to the letter Beatrice carried, she was a dutiful woman of good Christian character, skilled in cooking and needlework, eager to make a home for a prosperous merchant. The truth was that Gerald Morrison existed only in her aunt's imagination, a fabrication designed to get Beatrice out of Missouri and away from the scandal of refusing to marry the banker's son who had tried to force himself on her in the garden. Beatrice's aunt had made it clear that no decent family would take in a woman who caused such trouble. Never mind that the trouble had been inflicted upon her rather than caused by her. So Beatrice had taken the letter, accepted the lie, and climbed aboard the westbound stage with no intention of ever delivering that envelope to anyone. She would find work, make her own way, and build a life that belonged to her alone. The problem was that El Paso was not the thriving town her aunt had described. Oh, it was busy enough, with freight wagons and soldiers from Fort Bliss mixing with Mexican traders and cowboys fresh off the trail. But it was rough and wild, the kind of place where a woman alone drew attention like blood in water draws sharks. Already she could feel eyes on her, assessing, calculating. Beatrice kept her chin high and her gaze straight ahead as she walked toward what appeared to be a boarding house. She had taken perhaps 10 steps when a man stumbled out of the saloon directly into her path. He reeked of whiskey and sweat, his eyes unfocused but his intentions clear as he reached for her arm. "Well now, ain't you a pretty thing? New in town. Let me buy you a drink." Beatrice jerked her arm away. "I'm quite all right, thank you. Come on, don't be unfriendly." His grip tightened. The lady said no. The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. The drunk's eyes shifted focus, and whatever he saw there made him release her arm immediately and back away with his hands raised. "Didn't mean nothing by it, Austin. Just being friendly." "Be friendly somewhere else." Beatrice turned to see who had spoken. The man standing there was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pushed back on his head, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, probably no more than 26 or 27. There was a Colt revolver on his hip, worn with the ease of familiarity, and his boots were scuffed from hard use. "Thank you," Beatrice said, meaning it. "I appreciate your intervention." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so natural it seemed unconscious. "Austin Fletcher, madam. You look like you could use some help getting settled." "Beatrice Jenkins." She hesitated, then decided honesty was worth the risk. "I'm looking for respectable work and lodging. I'm new to El Paso." Something flickered in his dark eyes, some mix of concern and curiosity. "Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house 3 streets over. She's particular about her tenants, which makes it the safest place for a lady. As for work, that depends on what skills you have. I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I can cook and sew, though I'd rather not make my living with a needle if I can help it. Beatrice surprised herself with her own boldness, but there was something about Austin Fletcher that made her want to be honest. Perhaps it was the directness of his gaze, or the way he had stepped in to help without expecting anything in return. The schoolteacher left last month to get married. The town council has been looking for a replacement. Can you teach? I can. I attended Miss Harmony's Academy for young ladies until I was 17. I helped teach the younger girls their letters and numbers. Austin nodded slowly, as if making a decision. Come on, then. I'll take you to Mrs. Patterson first, get you settled. Then I'll introduce you to Samuel Grant. He's on the council and has been complaining about the school situation for weeks. Beatrice fell into step beside him, acutely aware of how improper this would have seemed back in St. Louis. But this was Texas, and different rules applied. Besides, she had already crossed so many lines that one more hardly mattered. You're taking quite a lot on faith, she said. How do you know I'm really a teacher and not some confidence woman? The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. I'm a pretty good judge of character. Besides, Mrs. Patterson will sort you out quick enough. She can spot a lie at 50 paces. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps creating small clouds of dust. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and Beatrice could feel sweat gathering at the small of her back. She still clutched the letter in her hand, that carefully crafted lie that had brought her here. That letter important? Austin asked, nodding toward her clenched fist. Beatrice looked down at the envelope as if seeing it for the first time. On impulse, she tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall into the dusty street. No, she said firmly, it's not important at all. Austin didn't ask for an explanation, which made her like him even more. They turned onto a quieter street lined with adobe buildings that provided blessed shade. A woman was sweeping the porch of a neat two-story house, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Patterson, Austin called out. Got someone who needs a room and a chance. The older woman set down her broom and studied Beatrice with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Alone? Yes, madam. Running from something or towards something. It was a fair question, and Beatrice gave it the respect of an honest answer. Both, I suppose. I left St. Louis because staying was impossible. I came here hoping to find work as a teacher. Mrs. Patterson nodded as if this made perfect sense. I have a room, $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no profanity. Church on Sunday is expected but not required. You'll share a washroom with Miss Clara, who works at the general store. That sounds perfect, thank you. Pays due on Saturday. You can start today if you have the money. Beatrice reached into her pocket and pulled out $2 silver, payment for her first week of sanctuary. Mrs. Patterson took them and gestured toward the door. Rooms at the top of the stairs, second on the left. Get yourself cleaned up, and I'll have Clara show you around town when she gets back from work. Austin, you're welcome to stay for coffee if you're of a mind. Thank you, madam, but I need to find Samuel and tell him about Miss Jenkins here. The sooner we get the school situation handled, the better. He tipped his hat to both women and strode off down the street, his long legs covering ground quickly. Beatrice watched him go, feeling an odd sense of loss, which was ridiculous. She had known the man for all of 15 minutes. Mrs. Patterson made a small humming sound. Austin Fletcher is one of the good ones. Works the Broken Arrow Ranch, runs cattle up to Kansas twice a year. Sends money to his younger sister back in Tennessee so she can attend a proper school. Never drinks to excess, never starts fights, always pays his debts. If he vouched for you, that carries weight in this town." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Patterson. I hope I can prove worthy of his trust." "Time will tell. Now come on inside and let me show you your room. You look like you could use a rest and a hot meal." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window overlooked the street, with curtains that actually matched the quilt on the bed. After weeks of sleeping sitting up in the stagecoach or on hard ground at way stations, it looked like paradise. Beatrice set down her single carpetbag and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She had done it. She had escaped St. Louis, escaped her aunt's house, escaped a future that would have crushed her spirit until nothing remained but a polite shell. The relief was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry, then stood up and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. There was no time for tears or self-pity. She needed to make herself presentable before meeting this Samuel Grant who might offer her a teaching position. She needed to prove that coming to El Paso had been the right choice. As she washed the dust from her face and hands, Beatrice thought about Austin Fletcher. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her breath catch. Not the predatory interest of the drunk or the calculating assessment of her aunt. Something different. Something that felt like recognition, as if he had been looking for her without knowing it. She pushed the thought away. Romance was the last thing she needed. She had just escaped one disaster. She wasn't about to invite another into her life. What she needed was stability, independence, and the freedom to make her own choices. A cowboy, no matter how kind his eyes, was a complication she couldn't afford. By the time Clara returned from work, Beatrice had changed into her least wrinkled dress and repinned her dark brown hair into something approximating respectability. Clara turned out to be a cheerful woman of about 30 with red hair and freckles, who immediately took Beatrice under her wing. "Mrs. Patterson told me about you, a teacher." "Oh, that's wonderful. My brother has 2 children who need proper schooling. His wife tries her best, but she never learned to read herself. Come on, I'll show you around town before supper." Clara kept up a steady stream of conversation as they walked through El Paso's streets. She pointed out the general store where she worked, the blacksmith shop, the church, the doctor's office, and the various saloons and gambling halls that Beatrice should avoid. She also provided running commentary on various citizens, delivered with such good humor that it never felt like gossip. "That's the lawyer's office, though we don't need much lawyering out here. Most disputes get settled more directly. The barber doubles as our dentist, which is terrifying but effective. Oh, and that building there is the town hall, where the council meets. Mr. Grant has an office there. He runs the freight company, so he's usually around unless there's a wagon train heading out." They had just turned back toward the boarding house when Beatrice saw Austin Fletcher again. He was standing outside the stable talking to an older man with a silver mustache. When he spotted Beatrice, he excused himself and walked over. "Miss Jenkins, I spoke with Samuel Grant. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9 if that suits you. The school building is still standing, though it needs some cleaning. The previous teacher left it in decent shape." "That's wonderful news. Thank you so much, Mr. Fletcher." "Austin," he corrected gently. "We're not much for formality out here. Then you should call me Beatrice." Clara looked between them with obvious interest but had the tact not to say anything. Austin shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less certain of himself. "I was wondering if you might like me to show you the school building this evening before it gets dark. That way you'll know what you're walking into tomorrow." "I'd like that very much. I'll meet you at Mrs. Patterson's after supper then, around 7. 7 would be perfect." He touched his hat brim again and walked back to the stable, but not before Beatrice caught the pleased expression on his face. Clara waited until they were well out of earshot before letting out a delighted laugh. Well, well, Austin Fletcher doesn't usually show this much interest in anyone. You must have made quite an impression. He's just being helpful, Beatrice said, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. If you say so. But I've lived in El Paso for 3 years, and I've never seen him volunteer to show anyone anything. He's polite, he's kind, but he keeps to himself mostly. Whatever he saw in you, it caught his attention good and proper. Beatrice didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But as they walked back to the boarding house, she found herself thinking about the evening ahead with an anticipation that had nothing to do with seeing a schoolhouse. Supper at Mrs. Patterson's table was a lively affair. Besides Beatrice and Clara, there were 2 other boarders, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson who worked as a clerk at the freight office, and a young woman named Sarah who helped at the doctor's office. The food was simple but plentiful, and the conversation was friendly without being intrusive. By the time the meal ended, Beatrice felt more at home than she had in months. She changed into a fresh dress, her last truly clean one, and was waiting on the porch when Austin arrived precisely at 7. He had cleaned up since the afternoon, and Beatrice noticed that his hair was still slightly damp, curling more noticeably without the dust weighing it down. He smiled when he saw her, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest again. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They walked through the cooling evening air, and Beatrice was grateful for the breeze that had picked up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in their intensity. Austin led her to a small building on the edge of town, a simple structure made of adobe with a wooden roof. "It's not much," he said as he unlocked the door, "but it's solid." The interior smelled of chalk and dust and old paper. There were benches for the students, a desk for the teacher, and a slate board on one wall. Shelves held a few precious books, their spines worn from use. Everything was neat but clearly unused for some time. The last teacher, Miss Abernathy, she married the surveyor and moved to San Antonio, Austin explained. She did her best to get the children started, but we need someone who can really teach them, give them a chance at something better than what we had. What about you? Did you have schooling? Beatrice asked, running her hand along the edge of the teacher's desk. Some. My mother taught me to read and do figures before she died. After that, it was mostly working to keep food on the table. My sister got the opportunity I didn't, which is how it should be. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. How old were you when your mother died? 12. My father followed her 6 months later. Fever took them both. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. I took whatever work I could find, saved every penny I could spare, and sent Elizabeth to a boarding school in Nashville. She's 15 now, smart as a whip, wants to be a doctor if you can imagine that. I can, Beatrice said softly. She's lucky to have a brother who believes in her. I'm the lucky one. Knowing she has a chance makes everything else worthwhile. He turned back to face Beatrice. What about you? You mentioned an academy in St. Louis. Your family must have had some means. Had being the important word. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. There was no money, just debts. My father's sister took me in, but she made it clear I was a burden. When her plans for my future didn't align with my own wishes, she decided it was best if I left. Austin's jaw tightened. She sent you out here alone. That's not just cruel, it's dangerous. She gave me a letter of introduction to a supposed shopkeeper looking for a wife. The shopkeeper doesn't exist. The letter was a lie designed to get me on a westbound stage and out of her life. Beatrice was surprised at how easy it was to tell him the truth. I tore it up this afternoon." "Good," Austin said firmly. "You deserve better than lies." They stood there in the dimming schoolhouse, looking at each other across the dusty floor. Something was building between them, something Beatrice had never experienced before. It wasn't the tepid expectation of a suitable match or the horror of unwanted attention. It was a pull, magnetic and undeniable, that made her want to close the distance between them, even as her rational mind warned her to be careful. "I should walk you back," Austin said, his voice rougher than before. "It's getting dark." They left the schoolhouse and walked through the quiet streets. Most people had retired indoors, and the only sounds were the distant piano music from a saloon and the occasional bark of a dog. When they reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Austin stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Good luck tomorrow," he said. "Not that you need it, you'll do fine." "Thank you, Austin, for everything. You've been incredibly kind." "It wasn't kindness." He met her eyes, and even in the darkness she could see the intensity there. "From the moment I saw you, I knew. I can't explain it, but I knew." Before Beatrice could ask what he meant, he tipped his hat and walked away into the night. She stood on the porch long after he disappeared from sight, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. The meeting with Samuel Grant went better than Beatrice had dared to expect. He was a practical man in his 50s who cared more about her ability to teach than her background. After testing her reading, writing, and arithmetic, he offered her the position on the spot. Salary is $25 a month plus use of the schoolhouse for lodging if you want it. Most teachers have preferred to stay at Mrs. Patterson's, but the option is yours. School runs Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. You'll have students ranging from 6 to 15 years old, different skill levels. Think you can handle it? "Yes, sir." "When would you like me to start?" "Monday next. That gives you a week to prepare. I'll arrange for the building to be cleaned and supplies to be ordered. You make a list of what books and materials you need, and we'll see what we can do." Beatrice left the meeting feeling triumphant. She had done it. She had a job, a real position that would pay enough for her to support herself. She was so caught up in her excitement that she almost didn't notice Austin waiting outside. "How did it go?" he asked, though his grin suggested he already knew. "I start Monday." $25 a month. She couldn't keep the pride from her voice. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." His smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. "This calls for a celebration. Would you let me buy you lunch?" They ate at a small restaurant run by a Mexican family, where the food was delicious and the portions generous. Austin told her about the Broken Arrow Ranch, where he worked as a ranch hand and occasional trail boss. He talked about the cattle drives to Kansas, the long days in the saddle, the storms and stampedes and river crossings that made every trip an adventure. In turn, Beatrice found herself telling him about her life in St. Louis, about the academy where she had been happy, about her parents who had loved books and music and encouraged her to think for herself. She even told him about the banker's son, about the forced kiss in the garden and her refusal to marry him afterward. "My aunt said I was ruining my reputation by making a fuss. She said I should be grateful that he wanted to marry me despite my lack of fortune. But I couldn't. The thought of being tied to that man for the rest of my life was unbearable." Austin's hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. "You were right to refuse. A man who would force himself on a woman has no honor. Your aunt should have supported you, not blamed you." "Well, she didn't. So here I am, 3 weeks of hard travel later, starting over in Texas." "I'm glad you're here," Austin said quietly. "I know that's selfish, given what you went through to get here, but I'm glad anyway." Over the next week, Beatrice threw herself into preparing for her new position. She cleaned the schoolhouse until it shone, organized the books, and drew up lesson plans for students of varying abilities. Samuel Grant secured funds for new slates and chalk, and the church donated some used primers. Clara helped her make curtains for the windows, and Mrs. Patterson contributed a small rug for the floor. Austin appeared at the schoolhouse every evening after his work at the ranch was done. Sometimes he helped with the heavy lifting, moving benches or hauling water for cleaning. Other times he just sat and talked while Beatrice worked, telling her stories about the ranch or asking about her plans for teaching. His presence had become the best part of her day, something she looked forward to with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. On Saturday evening, a week after her arrival in El Paso, Austin asked if she would take a walk with him after supper. They headed out of town toward the river, following a well-worn path that wound through scrub brush and mesquite trees. The sun was setting, and the air had finally cooled to something approaching comfortable. "I need to tell you something," Austin said as they walked. "I'm heading out on a trail drive the day after tomorrow. We're taking a herd up to Dodge City, won't be back until late October." Beatrice felt her stomach drop. "That's over a month. 6 weeks, probably, maybe 7 depending on weather and how the cattle behave." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I don't want to go. For the first time in 10 years of doing this work, I don't want to get on my horse and ride north. But I have to. I'm the trail boss and the men are counting on me. More importantly, Elizabeth is counting on the money I send her." "Of course you have to go, I understand. Do you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the worry lines around his eyes. "Because I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you understand what's happening here between us." Beatrice's breath caught. "Austin, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week. But Beatrice, I've never felt like this before. When I'm with you, everything makes sense. When I think about leaving, about being away from you for weeks, it feels wrong in a way I can't explain." "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but I feel it too." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Then let me say this properly. When I get back from Dodge City, I'd like to court you, properly, the way you deserve. I want to see where this goes if you're willing." "I'm willing," Beatrice said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "I'll wait for you." Austin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "I'll write when I can, though letters are hard to send from the trail, but I'll be thinking about you every day." They walked back to town in the gathering darkness, hand in hand, not talking because words seemed unnecessary. At Mrs. Patterson's porch, Austin pulled her into his arms for a brief, fierce embrace that left Beatrice breathless. 6 weeks, he said against her hair. "I'll be back before you know it." But 6 weeks felt like an eternity. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine and a knot of anxiety in Beatrice's stomach. She arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to make sure everything was perfect. By 8 o'clock, children began trickling in with their parents, most of whom wanted to meet the new teacher and assess whether she was up to the task. Beatrice greeted each family warmly, learned names, and made notes about each child. There were 14 students in total, ranging from 6-year-old Maria Garcia, who spoke more Spanish than English, to 15-year-old Thomas Bryant, who towered over Beatrice and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. The first day was chaotic but manageable. Beatrice divided the students by skill level and set up a rotation system so she could work with each group. The younger children needed help with basic letters and numbers, while the older ones were ready for more advanced reading and arithmetic. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but satisfied. It had gone well. She could do this. The days fell into a rhythm. Beatrice taught during the week and spent her evenings planning lessons and grading work. On Sundays, she attended church with Mrs. Patterson and the other boarders, slowly becoming part of the community. People greeted her on the street now, and mothers stopped her to share their children's progress or ask advice about discipline problems. She thought about Austin constantly. At night, lying in her narrow bed, she would replay their conversations, remembering the warmth in his eyes and the gentleness of his touch. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that a man could change when he had power over a woman. But deep down, she didn't believe Austin would change. There was a core of honor in him that ran too deep to be false. 3 weeks after he left, a letter arrived. It had been carried by a freight wagon that intersected with the trail drive, and the paper was stained and crumpled from the journey. Beatrice took it to her room and opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Beatrice," the letter began in a surprisingly neat hand. "We are camped 20 miles south of the Red River crossing. The weather has been good, and the cattle are behaving themselves for once. Should make good time if this holds. I think about you every day. When I am riding drag and eating dust, I think about your smile. When I am standing night watch under the stars, I wonder if you are looking at the same stars and thinking of me. The men have started teasing me about being distracted, which I suppose I am. How is the teaching going? Are the students giving you trouble? I keep imagining you standing in front of that classroom, patient and firm, opening up new worlds for those children. It is a good thing you are doing, better than chasing cattle across half the country. I know I said 6 weeks, but we might make better time than expected. I will come see you the moment I get back to El Paso. Until then, know that you are in my thoughts every minute of every day. Yours, Austin." Beatrice read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her dresser drawer. She got out paper and ink and began to write a response, though she had no idea when or how it would reach him. She told him about her students, about little Maria, who was learning English words with delight, about Thomas, who had finally stopped scowling and actually asked a question about mathematics. She told him about the way the sunset looked from the schoolhouse window and how she found herself saving up observations to share with him. She did not tell him that she was falling in love with him, though the truth of it was becoming undeniable. It seemed too large a thing to commit to paper, too precious to risk in a letter that might never arrive. September gave way to October, and the heat finally broke. The days were still warm but no longer punishing, and the nights turned cool enough to need a blanket. Beatrice's students were making real progress, even Thomas, who had reluctantly admitted that he might like to learn surveying and would need mathematics for that. Clara had become a true friend, someone Beatrice could talk to about anything. One evening, as they sat on the porch shelling peas for supper, Clara asked the question that had obviously been on her mind for weeks. "Are you in love with Austin Fletcher?" Beatrice's hand stilled. "Is it that obvious? Only to anyone with eyes. You get this look on your face whenever someone mentions his name, and you check for letters every single day." Clara bumped her shoulder against Beatrice's. "For what it's worth, I think he feels the same way. The way he looked at you before he left, like you were water and he was dying of thirst. We've only known each other 2 weeks before he left. So, my parents knew each other 3 days before my father proposed. They were married for 32 years before he passed, and they never stopped loving each other. Sometimes you just know." Clara picked up another pea pod. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Beatrice admitted. "What if I'm wrong about him? What if this is just loneliness making me believe in something that isn't real? Then you'll find out and deal with it, but I don't think you're wrong. I've known Austin for 3 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. That man is smitten, proper smitten. The conversation gave Beatrice hope and anxiety in equal measure. She wanted to believe Clara was right, that what she felt for Austin was returned in full measure. But a voice in her head, one that sounded suspiciously like her aunt, whispered warnings about men and their promises. The first week of October brought a terrible rainstorm that flooded the streets and forced school to close for 2 days. Beatrice spent the time in her room, reading and worrying about Austin. Trail drives in the rain were dangerous, with swollen rivers to cross and cattle that could stampede at the slightest provocation. She tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. When the rain finally stopped and the sun came out, Beatrice reopened the school and was pleased to see that all her students returned. The building had leaked in a few places, and she spent an hour mopping up puddles before lessons could begin. But the day went well, and by the afternoon she had almost forgotten her worries about Austin. Almost. It was Sarah, the doctor's assistant, who brought the news that made Beatrice's blood run cold. A man had been brought into the doctor's office, injured in a bar fight. In the course of treating him, he had mentioned being part of a trail drive that had been hit by a stampede during the storm. Several men had been injured and one had died. "Did he say which ranch?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry, I didn't think to ask. But Doc might know. He's still with the patient if you want to check." Beatrice abandoned all pretense of propriety and ran to the doctor's office. The elderly physician, Dr. Harrison, came out wiping his hands on a cloth stained with blood. "Miss Jenkins, is something wrong?" "The injured man from the trail drive. Which ranch is he from?" Dr. Harrison's expression softened with understanding. "The Flying W up north of here, not the Broken Arrow if that's what you are worried about. Though I did hear that the Broken Arrow crew was about 3 days behind them on the trail. They would have hit the same weather." "Thank you," Beatrice managed, though the relief was short-lived. Austin might not be the injured man, but he had still been riding through that storm, dealing with frightened cattle and dangerous conditions. The next 2 weeks were agony. Beatrice went through the motions of teaching, but her mind was elsewhere. She started taking walks to the edge of town in the evenings, looking north toward the trail, hoping to see the dust cloud that would signal an approaching herd. When the cattle finally arrived, it was a student who told her. 10-year-old Billy Morton burst into the schoolhouse during arithmetic lessons, breathless with excitement. "Miss Jenkins, there's a herd coming in. My pa says it's the Broken Arrow." Beatrice dismissed class early, something she had never done before. She walked toward the holding pens on the edge of town with as much dignity as she could muster, though every instinct screamed at her to run. A crowd had gathered to watch the cowboys bring in the cattle, dusty men on dusty horses performing a kind of controlled chaos that was impressive to watch. And there, riding point, was Austin Fletcher. He was thinner than she remembered, his face burned dark by the sun and stubbled with beard. His clothes were filthy, and he looked exhausted to his bones. But when his eyes found her in the crowd, his face transformed with a smile so bright it made her heart ache. He dismounted while the cattle were still moving, tossing his reins to another cowboy, and strode toward her through the dust. Beatrice met him halfway, not caring who saw or what they thought. He caught her up in his arms and lifted her off her feet, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You are here," he said into her hair. "You are real. I was starting to think I had dreamed you." "I'm real," Beatrice assured him, her arms around his neck. "And you are back. You are safe." He set her down but did not let go, just stood there holding her while the world went on around them. Someone whistled and another cowboy called out something teasing, but Austin ignored them all. His eyes searched her face as if memorizing every detail. "I need to clean up and settle things with the boss," he said reluctantly. "But can I see you tonight, properly with supper and conversation?" "Yes," Beatrice said simply. "Yes to all of it." Austin arrived at the boarding house that evening looking almost like a different person. He had bathed and shaved, his hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore clean clothes that actually fit. He brought flowers, wildflowers that must have taken him an hour to find, tied with a piece of ribbon. Mrs. Patterson, bless her, invited him to dine with all of them rather than making Beatrice entertain him in the front parlor like a formal caller. The meal was lively, with Austin answering questions about the drive and entertaining everyone with stories about ornery steers and prairie storms. But his eyes kept returning to Beatrice, and every time their gazes met, she felt that pull again, stronger than ever. After supper, they walked through town as the sun set, finally alone after weeks apart. Austin took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and Beatrice felt complete in a way she had not felt since he left. "Tell me everything," she said. "I want to hear all of it, not just the stories you told at dinner." So he did. He told her about the stampede during the storm, how they had lost 30 head and almost lost 2 men. He told her about the river crossings, the tension with settlers who did not want cattle on their land, the long days when nothing happened except riding and eating dust. He told her about lying awake at night thinking about her, wondering if she was still in El Paso or if she had moved on. "I got your letter," he said. "It reached me 2 weeks ago. I must have read it 100 times. Knowing you were here, waiting, that you had not forgotten me, it made every hard day easier." "How could I forget you?" Beatrice asked. "Austin, you are all I have thought about since you left." They had reached the schoolhouse, and Austin pulled her into the shadows beside the building, out of view of the street. His hands framed her face, gentle despite their calluses. "Beatrice, I need to know. These past 6 weeks, have I been alone in feeling this way? Because it seems impossible that you could feel the same, that someone like you could want someone like me." "Someone like you." Beatrice's voice rose with indignation. "Austin Fletcher, you are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met. You work yourself to exhaustion to give your sister opportunities you never had. You helped a stranger when you had no reason to. You have treated me with nothing but respect and gentleness. If anyone is fortunate in this situation, it is me." His eyes shone in the darkness. "I want to court you properly. I want to take you to church socials and dances. I want to introduce you to everyone as the woman I am serious about. And if you will have me, if I can prove myself worthy, I want to marry you." "You do not need to prove anything," Beatrice said, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. "I am already yours if you want me." Austin's kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But when Beatrice responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that made her dizzy with want. His hands were in her hair, scattering pins, and she did not care. Nothing mattered except this moment, this man, this feeling of being exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since the moment you tore up that letter. You were so brave, so determined to make your own way. I knew right then that you were extraordinary." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered. "It terrifies me how much I love you. I left St. Louis because I refused to marry without love, without choice. But this, what I feel for you, it is bigger than anything I imagined." They stood there in the shadows, holding each other, neither willing to let go. Eventually, practicality reasserted itself, and Austin walked Beatrice back to the boarding house. At the door, he kissed her again, soft and sweet. "Tomorrow," he promised, "I will come by after work and we will make plans." "Tomorrow," Beatrice agreed. She floated up to her room only to find Clara waiting with a knowing grin. "So I take it the reunion went well," Beatrice laughed, giddy with happiness. "Clara, I am getting married." "Well, of course you are. Anyone with eyes could see that coming." "When? We have not discussed details yet, but soon. I do not want to wait." "Good," Clara said, hugging her. "You deserve happiness, Beatrice. You deserve a man who looks at you like you hang the moon. And Austin Fletcher definitely looks at you like that." The next weeks were a whirlwind. Austin was working at the ranch during the day, but he came into town every evening to see Beatrice. They took walks, attended a church social, and had dinner at the boarding house so often that Mrs. Patterson started setting a place for him automatically. Austin was true to his word about courting her properly. He met with Samuel Grant to formally declare his intentions. He wrote to his sister Elizabeth, telling her about Beatrice and asking for her blessing. He even spoke to the ranch owner about his future prospects, securing a promise of a promotion to foreman when the current one retired in the spring. "I want to be able to provide for you," he explained to Beatrice. "A foreman makes better money, and there is a house that comes with the position. It is not fancy, but it is solid, room for a family." "I do not need fancy," Beatrice assured him. "I just need you." They decided to marry in November, a month after Austin's return. It did not seem worth waiting longer when they were both certain of their feelings. Beatrice would continue teaching until the end of the school term in May, then transition to being a rancher's wife. The thought filled her with excitement rather than dread, which told her everything she needed to know about her decision. Clara and Sarah helped Beatrice make a wedding dress, a simple but lovely creation in pale blue. Mrs. Patterson contributed lace for the collar and cuffs, and the ladies at the church donated a veil that had been worn by 3 previous brides. Beatrice felt welcomed, embraced by a community that had become her home faster than she ever thought possible. Austin bought a ring from a traveling jeweler, a simple gold band that Beatrice loved more than any diamond. He gave it to her a week before the wedding, slipping it on her finger as they sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch. "It is not much," he said, sounding worried. "It is perfect," Beatrice corrected. "Austin, I do not care about rings or dresses or any of that. I care about you, about building a life together. That is all that matters." The wedding took place on a bright November afternoon in the small church where Beatrice had been attending services. Elizabeth Fletcher arrived 2 days before, having traveled from Tennessee with the money Austin sent for the journey. She was a bright, curious 15-year-old with her brother's dark eyes and a quick mind that Beatrice immediately loved. "Thank you," Elizabeth said to Beatrice the night before the wedding, "for loving him, for seeing what a good man he is. He has sacrificed so much for me, and I have always worried that he would forget to live his own life. But you make him happy in a way I have never seen before." "He makes me happy too," Beatrice said. "I feel like the luckiest woman alive." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Austin stood at the altar in his best suit, his face solemn until Beatrice walked down the aisle toward him. Then he smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other all their days. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Austin kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to several guests' eyes. Beatrice clung to him, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had just done. She was married. She had a husband. She had a future that was hers to shape. The celebration afterward was held at the church hall, with food contributed by what seemed like half the town. People came up to congratulate them, to wish them well, to welcome Beatrice officially into the community. Samuel Grant gave a speech about the importance of good teachers and good men. Mrs. Patterson cried and hugged them both. Clara caught the bouquet and laughed when Austin's best man, a cowboy named Jack, asked her to dance. As the sun set, Austin pulled Beatrice outside for a moment alone. They stood in the cooling air, her hand in his, and looked up at the stars. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew was possible," Beatrice answered honestly. "Austin, I came to El Paso with nothing but lies and desperation, and then I met you and everything changed. You became my truth, my foundation, the thing I knew was real when everything else was uncertain." "You saved me too," he said. "I was just existing, working and sending money and not thinking about what I wanted for myself. But then you stepped off that stage and suddenly I wanted everything. I wanted a home and a future and someone to share it with. I wanted you." They kissed under the stars, and Beatrice thought about the letter she had torn up that first day. Her aunt had written lies to get rid of her, never knowing that those lies would lead Beatrice to the truth of real love, real partnership, real home. Austin had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at the hotel in town, a luxury compared to the boarding house. The room was simple but clean, with a large bed and a window that looked out over the main street. Beatrice felt nervous as they entered, suddenly shy despite everything they had shared. Austin seemed to sense her feelings. He took her hands and kissed them gently. "We do not have to rush," he said. "We have the rest of our lives. I know. I am just adjusting to the fact that you are my husband. It seems too good to be true." "I am very real," Austin assured her, "and very in love with you. That is not going to change." He helped her out of her wedding dress with careful hands, unlacing the back and steadying her as she stepped out of the layers of fabric. She returned the favor, helping him out of his suit coat and vest, unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly. When they finally came together, skin to skin, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their lovemaking was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Austin was patient, making sure Beatrice was comfortable, that she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Austin replied, his arms tightening around her. "My wife, my Beatrice." The next morning, they returned to reality. Austin went back to work at the ranch, and Beatrice returned to teaching. But everything felt different now, colored by the knowledge that they belonged to each other. Beatrice wore her wedding ring proudly, and her students noticed immediately, peppering her with questions about the ceremony and whether being married was different from being single. "It is exactly as different as you think it would be and not different at all," Beatrice told them, which made the older students laugh and the younger ones look confused. Elizabeth stayed in El Paso for 2 weeks before returning to school in Tennessee. Beatrice enjoyed getting to know her sister-in-law, seeing the family resemblance in gestures and expressions, hearing stories about Austin as a younger man. On the day Elizabeth left, she hugged Beatrice tightly. "Take care of him," she said, "and let him take care of you. He needs to be needed, but he also needs someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him. I think you are that person." "I will do my best," Beatrice promised. December brought cold weather and the end of the school term before Christmas. Beatrice gave her students small gifts she had made, bookmarks with their names stitched on them. Several parents invited her to their homes for holiday meals, and she accepted as many invitations as she could manage while still spending time with Austin. On Christmas Eve, Austin surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For writing down your thoughts," he explained. "And maybe for our children someday, so they can know what their mother was thinking and feeling." Children, Beatrice repeated, the word full of wonder. I have not let myself think that far ahead. I think about it, Austin admitted. About a little girl with your eyes or a boy I can teach to ride. About filling that foreman's house with noise and laughter. Is that something you want? Yes, Beatrice said without hesitation. I want that very much. I want to build a family with you, a real family based on love and respect and partnership. They spent Christmas Day at the ranch, where the owner and his wife had invited all the hands for a feast. It was Beatrice's first time seeing where Austin worked, and she was impressed by the sprawling operation, the hundreds of cattle, the efficient organization. Austin introduced her to everyone, his pride obvious, and Beatrice felt welcomed by the rough men who worked alongside her husband. The foreman, a grizzled man named Pete, pulled her aside at one point. Austin is a good man, he said bluntly. Best I have worked with. When I retire, there is no one I would rather see take my place. You are good for him. He is happier than I have ever seen him. He is good for me too, Beatrice said. I am lucky to have found him. Luck had nothing to do with it, Pete said with a knowing look. Sometimes people just fit together right, and you two fit. As winter gave way to spring, Beatrice and Austin settled into married life. They still lived separately during the week, with Beatrice at the boarding house and Austin at the ranch bunkhouse. But they spent weekends together, and Austin came into town most evenings. They made plans for the future, talking about what they would do when they moved into the foreman's house, how they would furnish it, what kind of garden Beatrice wanted to plant. In March, Beatrice realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was certain. But when the signs became undeniable, she finally told Austin. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set, and she simply took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby, she said softly. Austin froze, his eyes going wide. A baby, are you certain? As certain as I can be. I think it will come in October around our first anniversary. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. A baby. We are going to be parents, Beatrice. That is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy then? Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely speak. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Beatrice taught through the end of the school term in May, though she was starting to show by then. The town council had already hired a replacement teacher, a young man fresh from a teacher's college in the East. Beatrice spent her last weeks helping him prepare, sharing lesson plans and advice. On her final day, her students surprised her with a small party. They had made cards and drawings, and several of the mothers brought food. Thomas Bryant, who had grown another 3 inches and was now taller than Austin, gave a short speech thanking her for not giving up on him. You are the first teacher who treated me like I was smart, he said. Like I could do something with my life. I am going to be a surveyor, and it is because you believed I could learn the mathematics. Beatrice cried, which she blamed on pregnancy emotions, though it was really because she was touched by how much these children had come to mean to her. The move to the foreman's house happened in June. Pete had retired as promised, and Austin stepped into the role with confidence. The house was larger than Beatrice expected, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It needed work, but Austin threw himself into repairs with the help of several ranch hands. Beatrice focused on making it a home. She sewed curtains and made quilts. She planted a vegetable garden and flowers along the front walk. She arranged the few pieces of furniture they had acquired and hung pictures on the walls. By July, the house felt lived in and loved. a real home rather than just a building. Austin's sister Elizabeth visited again in August, this time bringing a school friend named Margaret. The two girls were fascinated by Beatrice's growing belly, full of questions about what it felt like to carry a baby. Beatrice answered as honestly as she could, though the truth was that pregnancy was both more wonderful and more uncomfortable than she had anticipated. "Are you scared?" Elizabeth asked one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous, I know that, but I am also excited to meet this little person to start the next chapter of our lives." "You and Austin are going to be wonderful parents," Elizabeth said with certainty. "I can already tell. You love each other so much, and you will love your children the same way." "I hope so. I want to give them what your mother gave you and Austin, a foundation of love and security, a belief that they can do anything they set their minds to." The baby came on October 15th, 3 days after Beatrice and Austin's first anniversary. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Austin stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement when she thought she could not go on. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with dark hair and strong lungs, Beatrice wept with relief and joy. Austin cut the cord with shaking hands, then held his son for the first time with an expression of awe. "He is perfect," Austin whispered. "Beatrice, we made a perfect little person." They named him William Fletcher, after Beatrice's father. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up at all hours with his demands for feeding. Beatrice had never been so exhausted or so happy. Austin proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with William when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in a surprisingly good baritone. "You are a natural," Beatrice told him one night as she watched him rock their son to sleep. "I am terrified I am going to break him," Austin admitted. "He is so small. He is tougher than he looks, just like his father." Elizabeth came for Christmas that year, bringing gifts for William and helping Beatrice with the endless work that came with a new baby. She held her nephew for hours, clearly smitten, and declared that being an aunt was the best thing ever. "I am going to spoil him terribly," she announced. "That is what aunts are for." "Please do," Beatrice said, laughing. "He deserves to be spoiled by someone who loves him." As William grew from infant to baby to toddler, Beatrice marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short years. She had arrived in El Paso with nothing but a handful of dollars and a letter full of lies. Now she had a husband she adored, a son who filled her days with joy, a home that was truly hers, and a community that had embraced her completely. Sometimes, usually late at night when she was rocking William back to sleep, Beatrice thought about her aunt in St. Louis. She wondered if the woman ever thought about her, ever regretted sending her away. Probably not. But Beatrice found she could not muster any anger anymore. If her aunt had not forced her onto that westbound stage, she never would have met Austin. She never would have found this life. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. William was finally asleep in his cradle inside, and they had a rare moment of peace. "How grateful I am," Beatrice said honestly, "for everything. For you, for William, for this life we have built. I was so scared when I came here, so uncertain, but it all worked out better than I could have imagined." "I am the grateful one," Austin said, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a dusty cowboy who had nothing to offer but hard work and promises. You made me believe in possibilities I never thought I could have." "We made each other believe," Beatrice corrected. "That is what love does. It makes you braver than you knew you could be." When William was 2 years old, Beatrice realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt less shocking and more like a natural progression. They told William he was going to be a big brother, though at 2 he did not really understand what that meant. The second baby, a girl they named Sarah after Beatrice's mother, arrived in the spring of 1880. She had Austin's dark eyes and Beatrice's stubborn chin, and from the moment she was born, it was clear she was going to be a force to be reckoned with. William was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help with her care. Gentle, Beatrice reminded him constantly as he patted Sarah's head with more enthusiasm than coordination. She is little. Life at the ranch was busy but good. Austin had proven himself an excellent foreman, managing the hands and the herds with quiet competence. The ranch owner, impressed by Austin's work, had even given him a share in the profits, which meant more financial security than they had ever hoped for. Beatrice stayed busy with the children, with her garden, with helping other ranch wives when they needed an extra pair of hands. She also started teaching again, in a way. Several of the ranch hands had children, and Beatrice began holding informal lessons in her parlor twice a week. It was not the same as running a proper school, but it kept her mind sharp and helped the children who might not otherwise have access to education. Elizabeth graduated from her boarding school in 1881 and immediately announced her intention to attend medical school. It was an audacious plan for a woman, but Austin had been putting money aside for years to make it possible. He helped her navigate the application process, wrote letters of recommendation, and used every connection he had to help her gain admission to the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. "I am so proud of you," Beatrice told Elizabeth the night before she left for Pennsylvania. "You are going to do amazing things." "I could not have done it without Austin," Elizabeth said, "without his belief in me and his financial support. He gave me opportunities he never had, and I am going to make the most of them. And when I finish medical school, I am coming back west. Small towns like El Paso need doctors, and I want to be the one providing that care." "We will be here waiting for you," Austin promised. "Do us proud, Elizabeth." "I will," she said. "I promise." The years passed in a blur of work and love and small daily joys. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing things she should not and asking questions faster than anyone could answer them. In 1883, a third child arrived, another boy they named Thomas after the student who had so impressed Beatrice. The house was loud and chaotic, full of laughter and occasional tears, and Beatrice loved every minute of it. She looked at her children and saw the future, saw possibility and hope. She looked at Austin and saw the man who had become her truth when everything else in her life had been lies. "Do you ever regret it?" Austin asked one night as they sat on the porch after the children were finally asleep. "Coming west, marrying a cowboy, living this life instead of something easier?" "Never," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Austin, you saved me. Not just from a bad situation, but from a life without real love or real choice. You saw me, truly saw me, and you gave me the space to become who I was meant to be. How could I ever regret that?" "I feel the same way about you," he said softly. "Before you, I was just going through motions. Work, save money, send it to Elizabeth, repeat. But you made me want more. You made me believe I deserved more. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to build something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out over the Texas plains. Beatrice thought about the letter she had carried all those years ago, the lies her aunt had written to be rid of her. That letter had been torn up and scattered to the wind within hours of her arrival in El Paso. But its destruction had cleared the way for something real, something true. Austin Fletcher had been standing outside that saloon when she stepped off the stage, and from that moment forward, her life had belonged to her in a way it never had before. He had not saved her like some damsel in a story. Instead, he had seen her strength and matched it with his own. He had offered partnership instead of protection, respect instead of control. He had loved her not despite her independence, but because of it. That was the truth the letter had been hiding. Not that Beatrice needed saving, but that she needed someone who would stand beside her while she saved herself. Austin had been that person from the very beginning, and he continued to be that person with every passing day. In 1885, Elizabeth returned to Texas as Dr. Elizabeth Fletcher, ready to open a practice in El Paso. She stayed with Beatrice and Austin for a month while setting up her office, and the children adored having their aunt around. Elizabeth examined them all thoroughly, declaring them in excellent health, and immediately began building a practice that served everyone from wealthy ranchers to poor Mexican laborers. "You did it," Beatrice said one evening as they watched Elizabeth play with the children in the yard. "You raised your sister, put her through school, and now she is a doctor. Austin, that is extraordinary." "She did the hard part," Austin said modestly. "I just provided the money. You provided belief and support and unconditional love. That is worth more than money." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder. "Our children are lucky to have you as their father. I am lucky to have you as my husband." "The luck is all mine," Austin insisted. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that you stepped off that stage, grateful that I was standing there, grateful that you saw something in me worth loving." As the years continued to unfold, Beatrice and Austin's life together deepened and enriched. They added a fourth child, another girl they named Clara after Beatrice's friend, who had married Austin's friend Jack and moved to a ranch 20 miles away. The two couples visited often, and their children grew up together like cousins. William proved to have a gift for working with horses, and started helping Austin train the new colts when he was just 12. Sarah declared her intention to become a teacher like her mother had been, much to Beatrice's delight. Thomas was the quieter of the children, but he had a talent for drawing and could sketch anything he saw with remarkable accuracy. Clara was still young enough that her talents had not yet revealed themselves, but she was already showing signs of being as wild and free-spirited as her namesake. In 1890, when they had been married for 14 years, Austin and Beatrice took a trip to San Antonio, their first time away from the children overnight. Elizabeth had agreed to stay at the ranch and mind the little ones, and Beatrice's students had pitched in to help with meals and bedtime routines. "It feels strange to be alone," Beatrice said as they checked into a hotel much nicer than the one they had stayed at on their wedding night. "I keep thinking I should be getting someone a drink of water or breaking up an argument." "Try to enjoy the peace," Austin suggested with a smile. "We will be back to chaos soon enough." They ate dinner at a restaurant, went to a play at the theater, and walked through the city streets hand in hand like the young couple they no longer were. Beatrice looked at Austin in the lamplight and saw the boy he had been alongside the man he had become. The years had added lines around his eyes and silver to his hair, but they had also added depth and wisdom and an unshakable certainty about who he was. "What are you staring at?" he asked, catching her looking. "My husband, the father of my children, the love of my life." Beatrice smiled. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since we met and how much has stayed the same. You are still the kindest man I know, Austin Fletcher. Still the most honorable. I love you now even more than I did when we married." "That is good," he said, pulling her close, "because I am never letting you go. You are stuck with me, Mrs. Fletcher, for better or worse for the rest of our days." "I can live with that," Beatrice said, and kissed him under the San Antonio stars. They returned home to find the children had behaved relatively well for Elizabeth, though there were stories of minor mishaps that made both parents laugh. Life resumed its normal rhythm, the comfortable pattern of work and family and small daily joys. As the children grew older and more independent, Beatrice found herself with more time. She returned to teaching more formally, opening a small school in El Paso for the children of ranch workers and townspeople. Austin built her a proper schoolroom next to their house, and she taught there 3 days a week. The rest of the time, she spent managing the household, helping with ranch business, and enjoying the family they had built together. The 20th century arrived with celebration and hope. William was 22 by then, working as a full partner on the ranch alongside his father. Sarah had gone east to teachers' college, following in her mother's footsteps. Thomas had moved to Santa Fe to apprentice with an artist, sending home letters full of excitement about everything he was learning. Clara, at 17, was the only one still at home, and she spent her days helping Elizabeth at the medical practice, having discovered a passion for healing. "They are all leaving," Beatrice said one evening, watching Clara ride off to town. "Our babies are growing up and building their own lives." "That is what we raised them to do," Austin reminded her, "to be strong enough and confident enough to chase their dreams. We gave them the foundation they needed, and now they are using it. I know. I am proud of them. I just miss having a full house." Austin pulled her into his arms. "Then it is a good thing I still like having you all to myself. After all, you were mine first, before we were parents." It is nice to remember that. They stood there holding each other, two people who had built a life from nothing but hope and hard work and unwavering love. Beatrice thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in El Paso, frightened and desperate, carrying a letter full of lies. She could barely recognize that woman now. The truth was that the letter had not mattered at all. What mattered was that Austin Fletcher had been standing there when she needed someone most. What mattered was that they had recognized in each other the possibility of something real, something lasting. What mattered was that they had chosen each other every day since then, through good times and hard times, through children and work and all the small challenges that life brought. That was the real truth, the one that had sustained them through more than 2 decades of marriage. Not the false promises in her aunt's letter, but the genuine promise they had made to each other. To love, to honor, to stand together no matter what came. In the spring of 1901, William married a rancher's daughter named Anne, and Beatrice and Austin found themselves becoming grandparents for the first time when a grandson arrived 9 months later. Sarah returned from college and opened her own school in El Paso, quickly becoming as beloved a teacher as her mother had been. Thomas sold his first painting to a gallery in New York, and Clara accepted a position working alongside Elizabeth at the medical practice. "We did well," Austin said one evening as they sat on their porch, now weathered by years but still solid. "Our children are happy and healthy and building good lives. We have grandchildren. We have work we love and a community we are part of. Beatrice, we did well." "We did," she agreed, taking his hand. His fingers were more gnarled now, the knuckles swollen with arthritis from years of hard work, but they still felt perfect wrapped around hers. "Austin, do you ever think about that first day, when I stepped off the stage coach?" "All the time," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to not being there, to being out on the range when you arrived. I think about how different both our lives would have been if I had not been standing outside that saloon at that exact moment. I think about the letter I was carrying," Beatrice said. "About how it was full of lies meant to get rid of me, but it brought me here instead. Brought me to you. It is strange how something dishonest can lead to something so true. The letter was a lie, Austin agreed. But what we found together, what we built together, that was the truth. You were the truth I had been looking for without knowing it, and I hope I was the same for you. You were, Beatrice assured him. You are, Austin Fletcher. You have been my truth for 25 years, and you will be my truth until the day I die. That is the only certainty I need. They sat together as the sun set over the Texas plains. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing but hope and love and determination. The letter Beatrice had carried had been a lie, carefully crafted to send her away. But the cowboy standing there when she arrived had become her truth, solid and unwavering, the foundation on which she built everything else. That truth had sustained them through joy and sorrow, through the raising of children and the building of a life. It had been tested and proven time and again, growing stronger with each passing year rather than fading. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, hands linked and hearts intertwined, they knew it was a truth that would endure as long as they both drew breath. The stars came out one by one, the same stars they had watched on their wedding night and countless nights since. Beatrice leaned her head on Austin's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about all the paths her life might have taken. But only one path had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this truth, and she would not change a single thing,